really know squat about it, about slam. Thank you. We don't really know much about that. We've got an older, I was going to say congregation. I'm spending a lot of time at church this week. We have an older membership, and we want to get into it. You know, the national reasoning was that that's where young people are headed, and we want to play too, and we want to make our poetry more dynamic and see what we can do. Just by the way, you know, I told you, Alex, that I entered the national contest, the regular performance poetry contest. I got a second honorable mention.
Hey, look at that.
Yay. It's not first prize, but it's the first time I ever did it. So, okay.
That's not too bad for the first time, huh?
Yeah. It's always cool. So we are very happy to have Portland's own Alex Dang. And he started performing poetry at age 17 and hasn't slowed down since, it says in his bio. He was on the Portland Poetry Slam Nationals team in 2013, 14, 15, and 16, making him the only Asian American poet in Portland's history to be on the team 4 years in a row. Earned his way to become the Eugene Poetry Grand Slam champion in 14, 15, and 17. He's been a TEDx speaker for both U of O and Reno, Nevada. His work has been featured on Huffington Post, Upworthy, and Everyday Feminism, and has been viewed over 2 million times on YouTube. And if you haven't seen it there, give it a look. Please welcome Alex Dang.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate the warmth and the invitation. Thank you again to Sue and the Oregon Poetry Association for having me out here. And a little bit about myself. My name is Alex Dang. I am 28 years old and I am a born and raised Oregonian right here in the city of Roses, Portland, Oregon. Back when we were still the Jailblazers, back when there was still all them good stuff, so felony flats. I've been here since before and probably after the gentrification. And I have to say that poetry really gave me a voice and a understanding of how to access the world. I think I've always been curious about my identity. There's a really good line by Eve Ewing, and she says, I wanted a map not to know where things are, but to know where I am. And I feel like so much of my life has been informed by where other things are, telling me where I am at, who I am, where I am. And then I realized that I wanted to know where I thought I was, who I thought I was. And that became a whole bucket and a half, right? Because then you start looking at yourself and you don't exactly know where to begin. And so as a youngster, as a high schooler, I started with theater. And with theater, obviously you have to embody that character. You have to learn what the character likes, what they dislike, how they would react to this, if they are a hugger or if they're a mouth breather, all these small little things to inform the character's performance. A lot of people do that method acting, but you want to embody that character as much as possible. So I learned how to do that. And then at the same time, I also learned, I also performed and competed in speech and debate. So I was really very used to performing for an audience. But with speech and debate, it was different because the audience was usually a judge who was a parent who did not want to be there at 7:30 in the morning, 5 poorly dressed high schoolers, all in oversized suits and badly tied ties, and me being very loud, trying to make these people laugh. And the other 5 debaters are my competition. So my audience is my judge and my 5 competitors. What am I to do? I got to get real skin. I got to get thick skin real quick. I learned a couple of techniques. I got to be more and more comfortable. I figured out how to read the audience, read the room, and I figured out which scripts would work best, which rooms would call for these poems, which rooms would call for that poems, the kind of performance, whether or not I want to be big and bombastic, or if it was a quieter room, if they would appreciate the slowness and the nuance. Same script, different performances, different rooms. It's going to be a different thing every time. So with all this in mind, I also wanted to be a musician. I wanted to be a rapper, so I was writing a lot. I was writing a lot of lyrics, and I wanted to practice my performing skills. So I went to an open mic, and one of the few all ages open mics in Portland was at the Backspace Cafe, and it hosted the Portland Poetry Slam. And I got there, and I saw on stage everything I wanted to do. It was essentially a 3-minute monologue that you got to write yourself. It was every actor's dream. And for me, performing in a competitive setting, I was performing to my judges. I was performing to the audience. I already knew kind of how to do that. And in theater, you don't really get a face-to-face monologue unless you're in Shakespeare and you're doing a soliloquy, or it's like a different play that's breaking the fourth wall. So with all these different elements, I was like, oh, I'm gonna have so much fun with this. And now we are here. So with all of that being said, I would love to get us through a small little workshop that will hopefully inform you about how to perform, about your comforts, about where you want to be, whether or not you're reading or performing, or you want to go really, really hard and go on stage and do every single open mic, or if you just want to learn how to just have a little bit more confidence in your own work. So I am going to share screen a PowerPoint, if that's all right. Okay. And Sue, if you could give me screen share access, I think the host can change.
You should
that.
have it already if you want to try. Is it not working for you?
It says that the host has disabled the participant. I think it's because I'm technically a participant.
Oh, okay. Okay. You should have access now.
Great, thank you. Awesome. Okay. And okay, are we seeing what I'm seeing? Oops.
Not yet.
Not yet. All righty. All right.
There we go.
Okie dokie. And this is my little workshop, and it is called Finding Your Core, an approach to storytelling and performance. So again, this is just going to be very personal. I'm going to leave about 10-15 minutes at the end for any questions, comments, concerns, and general discussion of any sorts. And yeah, let's just get straight to it. So every good story has a core. Every good scene, I feel like every good thing has like a very solid center. So core, conveniently for us, stands for character, objective, relationship, and environment. So we're gonna go over these four different tenets and kind of break them down and what that means as far as poetry goes, as far as you as a reader, and even as far as you as perhaps an artist. So let's break down the character. The character, the main character, the speaker, the narrator of the poem. For all intents and purposes, from now on, I will refer to the main character of the poem as the speaker. I like to do this because it is very assumptive to just assume that the author is the character in the poem. We don't ever want to make assumptions. And also, I really want to make a very distinct differentiation between the authorial you and the poem you, because that's going to be very important down the line. So we have the speaker of the poem. If there's any other characters in the poem, if the speaker is interacting with anybody. And then finally, within the character, we need to consider first, second, or third person perspective, because if it's a third person perspective, that means we have an omniscient narrator of sorts. And that's another, quote, character to keep in mind. If it's first, if it's second, if it's third, these are levels of degrees that the character can start interacting with the audience with. So it's a good thing to consider when you are creating your character or just getting to know them. But the three elements that creates a character that I like to use is attitude, voice, and posture. Now, this is kind of coming from a theater lens, so this is also kind of embodying it, but if you're going to be reading your poem, you're going to be thinking, are you going to be on your feet or are you going to be sitting? Are you going to be on headphones, no screen, no camera? So with all those things, I feel like they're still applicable. So for the character, we have our first category, attitude, our first element. So think about your speaker's likes and dislikes, values, beliefs, little things like favorite colors, hobbies, foods, memories, general mood and demeanor. These are the things, these general traits that make up the attitude of a character. And then now let's talk about their literal voice, speed and cadence of the voice. If they use a specific kind of vocabulary or slang that can say a lot about somebody. You can tell somebody's from Chicago because they're from Chicago, and you will know through diction and word choice. There's a difference between somebody trying to overwhelm you and going really, really quick so then you can't really actually comprehend everything versus someone who is very, very trying so hard, because I work with preschoolers and sometimes I have to use this voice and just beg with them, please. But these are all different ways that inform the character. And then finally, we have our posture, because body language, it can inform and contrast, and it can also lead to the attitude and to all that, right? So with that being said, if it can both contrast and inform the attitude and voice of a character, we can think about how they carry themselves or how they give themselves away, kind of like a poker tell. Are they kind of a nervous itcher? If you are reading with a hunched over posture, if you're looking down as opposed to looking up, as opposed to straightening your back. Also, just from a fun character building standpoint, because I used to do a lot of improv theater as well. So this was one of the things that we would always teach, because if you chose one of them, the other two would follow. If you chose a weird voice, perhaps like this, the posture might slunch over, because this is probably a goblin, and thus goblin attitude. I like gold. I don't like humans. I have fire. My favorite food is hunches of meat. Versus a wider posture, right? If you're trying to convey strength, determination, what kind of posture would reflect that? What kind of vocabulary do you want to use? Where are you actually speaking? And so these are the small things that we consider when we even go about our lives. How do we change our speed and our vocabulary and our diction when we talk to other people? How does our body language change? How does our attitude change from place to place? All righty. So finally, we have objective. So simply, what are you, the author, trying to achieve? What are you, the speaker, trying to achieve? And is there conflict in achieving the objective? Now, again, I'm kind of coming from this at a theater lens. So with a lot of theater and a lot of scenes, you're always trying to look for that main crucial conflict. And a lot of the times, if the scene isn't going anywhere, it's because there isn't a conflict. Take Waiting for Godot, for example. Nothing happens. And that's the point of that poem. So understanding what your objective is, even if your objective is, I want to create a poem with no conflict, to keep that in mind is very, very important, because then the next question is, what do we do to achieve our goals? How do we get our objective done? And I've divided that into two categories: tactics and techniques. So tactics are what the speaker uses to accomplish their goals. They can be demanding, pleading, flattering. We've talked about the intimidating body language, speaking slowly, different gestures and acts, being gentle, right? And then the techniques are what the author uses to accomplish their goals. So the other you will be thinking about forms. A sonnet versus a haiku versus a sestina. If you're going to do an elegy, you're probably going to do it about something sad. If you're doing an ode and you realize that this poem is not long enough, you might turn it into an essay or a play or a song. Consider the different genres. How does horror build tension? How does drama build tension? How does humor build tension? You can look at different techniques in different genres, even simple things like line breaks, where people place words, how people capitalize things. These are the small techniques that authors use to accomplish their goals. Meanwhile, the tactics are what the speaker uses. these emotions, these actual things that are happening within the world of the poem. All righty, just gonna check in. How are y'all doing, everybody? Awesome. All righty. Oops. So that was C, that was O, and now we are at R. We are at the relationship side of things. And simply relationship, I like to think of it as the way the author and the speaker and the characters interact with the world. And the world is a really, really big term in this sense. So let's shrink it down a little bit to the audience that you're sharing this with. So when we consider relationship, we are now starting to consider the audience. So first, what is your relationship to your work? Because above all, this is your work. This is your poetry. This is your baby. You do with whatever with you want, because this is yours. I'm not going to tell you how to write poems. I'm not going to tell you how to do anything. I'm merely here to suggest. But understanding the relationship to your work, I feel like is very important, because if I was trying to write a poem, oftentimes I will write a poem and then halfway through I realize, oh, wait a minute, this is the actual poem I want to write about. And then I realized that the relationship between me and the first half of that poem was, oh, I was just frustrated and I needed to get that frustration out. And now I'm looking at this without frustration. My relationship to me in this poem is that of me being contemplative, of me being regretful. But there's no more anger anymore. But now it's just regret. And that's different. Having an anger relationship, having a trust relationship with your work, if you are combating it, or if you want to challenge your work, what is your relationship to what you're creating right now? And then we go a little bit interior to the poem itself. What are the speaker's relationships? So in regards to, if this poem is like a tiny little script and the speaker is the main character, what are the speaker's relationships that we are given? Are there implications of the speaker's relationships outside of the poem? Is it more of an interior relationship with the speaker itself? It's very important, I feel like, to consider the personal and intimate aspects. And while it's difficult to quantify them, I think these questions help focus the conversation. And then this is where we're going to start expanding a little bit wider again, because what is your work's relationship to the audience? And then we have to ask, who is your audience? Who are we reading to? And that kind of leads into our final element, our final little tenet, environment. Where's the poem taking place? So first, we just consider, like, literally in the poem, is there a setting? Is it taking place in the office, at the beach, in the speaker's bedroom? Is it in some weird nebulous space? But it's important to know where the poem is taking place, just because as a performer, if you're doing theater and you don't have a set, it's pretty important to imagine what's going on, because if you put a table and then you walk through the table later, that's not great. This is really just more details. But more importantly is, where is the poem taking place physically? And now we are talking about, if we're doing a virtual one just like this, we can think about whether it's live streaming just like this, or if you are recording a video previously and sending it off. And with that, you have a lot of advantages. You know, you can edit, you have lighting, you can choose all your different camera angles, but you're going to put that work out there and you won't be able to interact with your audience, right? So of course, that's the beauty of live streaming. And of course, that's why people like going to live shows. And then when we also just think about virtually, maybe a little bit more abstractly of just not physically there, if we think about music, for example, you have a music video versus the album version of a song versus a live performance of the song. All the same, but three different versions. So that's kind of how I want to imagine the environment physically. You as the performer thinking, where is this poem taking place physically? And then when we go to in person, let's think about the venue. Is it loud? Is it quiet? A coffee shop, a bookstore, a bar? If it's literally at a slam poetry competition, if it's at an open mic, if it's at an open mic that primarily is musical, I've definitely tried to do poems at like rock and roll open mics, and it goes 50-50. It's a challenge. But who are you reading to? Who is the audience in front of you? You know, read the room type situation. And, you know, there are some poets and performers who say, damn the room, I will read my own work. That's perfectly fine. That's perfectly great. But then we go back to the O side of core, objective. What is your objective? And if your objective is to disturb the comfortable, if your objective is to make people feel uncomfortable, by all means do it. Just please remember that that's what your objective is, and to do it with intention. There's a great joke by one of my favorite comedians, Mike Birbiglia, and he says that if you have to explain it's a joke, it's a bad joke. So if you have to explain, oh, I'm doing this because of XYZ, you probably haven't done a good enough job to explain it. So that's where we're talking about intention. And that's why we have to be very careful with all of these things. And this is why all these small details matter. Again, I only know all these things because of my very specific background of wanting to be a rapper, doing speech and debate, doing theater, and being a professional slam poet for a few years. These are all my elements. However, if you took the same kid and you put him in Durham, North Carolina, he might have a different set of skills. If I asked you something, you might be able to school me on a lot, because I've only listened to Rumors by Fleetwood Mac, and I know I need to listen to the rest of their discography, but I'm still learning. I'm still learning as well. So we do all of these different things. We learn from each other. We take what's unique with us and we try to bring it to our performance, to our writing, to our lives, of course. And then finally, just a little boring, on text. Is your reader reading it? And if they are they physically reading it? Are they reading it on a screen? If they are reading it on a screen, is it an iPad? Is it a cell phone? All these different things, because you know what an E.E. Cummings poem looks like, but do you know what it sounds like? You probably know what a Frank O'Hara poem sounds like, but would you be able to identify it? And these are the different things when we talk about voice, when we talk about environment, when we talk about character and objective and relationship, these are all the things that kind of go into the performance. So finally, we have our tips and tricks. So essentially you got to know your audience. If you know your audience can handle a challenge, challenge them. If you know that they prefer this kind of poetry, maybe you want to read that. Maybe you're just matching the mood. You know, oftentimes I will go into a venue and I will see the vibe, the atmosphere. If it's a low-key wine bar, I'm probably not going to whip out my 10-page long epic about, that's like, you know, my take on Milton, right? I'm not going to be shouting about brimstone and fire. Maybe I want to do something more personable about like a very nice date that I had with my girlfriend, you know, do a couple of love poems. But sometimes you take that atmosphere and you as a performer go, I want to flip it. I myself want to change the entire mood of the room. And this is where we go into memorized versus on page versus reading for the first time. Are you reading this poem literally for the first time? You might have some trips and bumps. You might want to just read it out loud a few times before you actually read it. And then when I say on page, I usually say, if I'm on page, that means I know enough of the poem memorized, but I will still need a glance at my script every now and then. And then memorized is just complete memorized. I have it memorized. But these are all different intentions for different kinds of readings. If you're doing a full 30-minute poetry set where you're reading from your book and you get to talk to the audience, you might not actually have to memorize that much poetry, but you should take the time to read it out loud. You should understand the natural beats and rhythms of your poems, and you should respect your work enough to learn how to serve them in a vocal way, in a rhythmic way, in a sonic way. And then finally, like general tips about memorizing. I just repeat them to myself a lot. I walk around, I mutter to myself. I will sometimes handwrite them and try to rewrite and rewrite. But the most important thing I do about memorizing, because everybody has a different way of doing it. Some people will print out their poem and chunk it out into different sections. So they're just memorize it section by section by section. Some people will memorize the entire thing. Some people will keep writing it over and over again until they memorize it, however way works best for you. But I think the most important thing about memorizing a poem and then performing it is to not memorize it with specific planned rises and falls. You don't want to have the emotions already pre-planned out, because then you have that version of the poem memorized and not the poem memorized. Because sometimes audiences will not laugh at a joke. And if you expect them to pause and you just pause for 2 seconds and no one laughs and you don't know how to recover from that, you might lose your rhythm. You might lose where you're going. So understanding of how to memorize the poem itself versus memorizing where the landmarks are. And then eventually, once you do it enough, you'll be able to feel your own rhythm, and you'll be able to tip it and change it and turn it whenever you'd like and want to. Yeah, so that was my kind of quick, brief character, objective, relationship, environment, taking all these things into consideration. Questions, comments, concerns, and then we can maybe even have a more in-depth conversation after this. If you want to keep up with me, website, email, my social media, all that good stuff.
Yeah, Alex, in my singing history, I kind of came to believe that you can't really know and do a song until you have it memorized. And I wonder if this is the same thing with the poetry, and that you can't really get into it if you're still having to look at the words.
I think there's a certain truth to that. Because your brain might be going, I need to perform this poem. Your brain might just not even be on and you're just doing the poem. Your brain might go, oh no, what's the next line? And, and by all means, I have definitely skipped over chunks of my poem because I was like, I've performed this poem 1.5 million times. I got it. And then it's like, oh my goodness, I shouldn't have been so confident. I should have practiced more. So even when it's a poem you've done 1,000 times, you can still get tripped up. There still might be that audience. There still might just be that moment in which you still have to catch yourself.
Yeah, for me, sometimes it's like the road runner, and till he looks down and realizes he's on, in the middle of the air and he's going to fall. But yeah, you think you know it, and then you suddenly think, what is that line? Oh crap, I don't know. Because you were going on autopilot and then it's gone.
I've got a question for you, Alex.
Yeah.
What do you do if you're sort of ambivalent about your work, or maybe you're just not feeling it? I mean, you're suggesting memorizing and performing, so you probably have something kind of canned, so that it doesn't really matter whether you're feeling it or whether you're ambivalent about your work. But I don't know about you, but I've written, the idea of reading books or poems from a book that I wrote a long time ago just seems very difficult. So do you have suggestions about that?
That's a really interesting question, David. And I really, really like that, because I've been looking at a lot of my earlier work as well. A little cringy, a little, oh gosh, I would not want to read this. But there are certain gems and certain lines where I go, oh, that's not too half bad. And then I go, oh, there's a reason why 18-year-old Alex wrote this poem. There's a reason why 23-year-old Alex wrote this poem. There's a reason for this poem that existed. And then I start not exactly distancing myself, but imagining and giving grace and granting grace to my younger self. So now it is no longer me trying to get back into that younger mindset, but it is me as an older poet reflecting on my previous poem and reading it with a new grace, with a new eye, with a new voice. But, sometimes I definitely do phone it in. Sometimes I'm just not feeling it. And those are one of those things where you have to personally take care of yourself And this is where, as a performer and as a professional poet and as a coach for different college teams that would perform at poetry slams, there is something called emotional trauma porn, in which oftentimes judges will grant higher scores to the more dramatic and traumatic kind of poems. They will give higher scores to the more serious poems. And thus, poets will think that they only can write about serious, heartbreaking things. And thus, every night they go up on stage, re-traumatizing themselves because they're writing about things that they have not fully processed. And so if you're not there, do not put yourself there. But if you are there, that is a very good strength, because also understanding that this is your experience and this is your gift, you decide to share with the world. If you don't want to share it, that's fine. But empower yourself by, when you do read it out loud to people, that this is a gift, that you are giving the world something because the world has given you so much. So this is just you kind of throwing a little bit back in the pot, right?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Hope that helped.
I've got a question.
Mhm.
I learned to read aloud in such a way as to make, reading stories aloud, so that, there was a rise and fall to the voice, and that there was kind of a melodic feature to it. And I find that trying to carry over how I learned to read aloud, carrying that over to reading my poetry doesn't necessarily work all that well. And so I'm trying to figure out, how do I read so that there's emphasis on, how do I choose which words I give emphasis to, and modulate my voice in such a way that the poem has the impact I want it to have, rather than making it just sound la 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 la. I don't want it to sound like that. I want it to have more impact. And I'm hearing younger poets. I won't tell you how old I am. Okay, I'm 61, but I'm hearing people that are, in their early 30s reading their poetry in almost like a monotone kind of flat delivery, but with strong emphasis on certain words, and it seems to, it's more dramatic, and it seems to make the poem more powerful. So, anyway, that's not a very well phrased question.
I think I get the general gist, because that's a question that runs in my head a lot. The idea of, what is my voice performing, right? Because you want to find the right voice that actually serves your poem, but you don't want to do what's popular, what everyone else is doing, but also you still want to do what works, right? So with that being said, I think always you have to understand what your poem is about, what your objectives, all that good stuff. I think if you are trying to find just different ways of reading it, if you are embodying the speaker, if there's one line that usually you would go down, try going up. If there is a line that you would read sarcastically, try reading it genuinely. Just change those tactics a little bit, see what happens. Another technique that I like to do is that a lot of people will kind of do that kind of lyrical, very rhythmic, kind of very breathy, slow back and forth, this kind of rhythm. And I feel like that has a lot to do with the beat, with the rhythm. And also, I think it also has to do with a lot of the times the way the poem is literally spaced on the page. They're trying to read with the line breaks, with these pauses. So sometimes if you're not about that, I have always just chopped up a poem and just put it in a block and just read it like a paragraph, just read it. A lot of people compliment me on my poetry style because it's very conversational and casual. Like I could start a poem about my father and about how he's a mechanic and how he had 4 boys and none of us could replace a blown tire, but that's how my dad showed love. He shows love with his motor oil hands. And I've already been doing the poem for 2 lines, 3 lines. And that's just my voice. I like being able to make it extremely accessible and approachable. Some people, when they perform, they know exactly what they want to say. So they will make no interaction with the audience because they go up there, they deliver their poem, they get out of there. And that's one of those poets and performances where you could memorize the entire thing. But if you want to, but that is completely neglecting your audience. And that would be completely ignoring them, which is a tactic. That is, I mean, how many musicians out there that actually hate performing for live audiences because they hate it when people sing along to their songs, right? So they're like purposely play it weird so people cannot sing along. So people have different audiences with their relationship. And that's where we were looking at in the R section, relationship. What is your relationship to the work? What is the work's relationship to the audience? What are you trying to accomplish? And then we go back to objectives. And then we go one step again to characters of what would your character do? What would your speaker do in this situation? And so that also might influence your reading. If you're reading this story in a bar versus in a coffee shop, or who you're reading it to. If you're reading it to your friends versus a classroom of preschoolers versus your family versus your old high school buddies, those are all going to kind of change the story a little bit in the way you deliver it. So these are small little tips and tricks you can keep in mind to make yourself feel more comfortable with the reading as well, and to find your own voice.
Thank you.
Yeah, Lorna.
So this has been really awesome. Thank you for doing this. I'm a writer. I'm also a speaker. I've been on podcasts. I do live talks. And I want to ask a question about, and I don't know how this is going to come out, but like how you sound in your head versus how you sound on the playback or whatever. And
isn't that the question?
NPR actually did a segment on this, and like Terry Gross was on, who I love her voice, but she was like, "Oh, I hate my voice," and yada yada, and it sounds different in your head than it does, when you're up, when you're speaking or performing, whatever. And so I guess I don't really know what my question is, just if you can speak to that at all, or if you can, like, is there like a way to mitigate like the differences between how you think you sound and how you actually sound?
I think for me, 100%, this is a question I think about all the time, because a lot of people, because I do not like my voice as well. I will constantly say that I don't like my voice, but I am a professional speaker. And a lot of people say that they like my voice and they like the way that I read poems. So with that being said, I have to use the other things around me. To requote e-viewing, I wanted a map not to know where my voice is, but to know where everything else around it is so I could figure out what my voice sounds like. And I would just have to kind of build up a better armor, not a better armor. What I used to do was think, okay, I got to put on an armor. I got to put on a thick skin. I have to put on like my uniform in order to go to work. But now lately, I've been more trying to think about the voice in a way of it's merely your medium to everybody else. So if I'm canceling out the voice, then all I'm thinking about is how am I going to be best delivering this to people? And so that's where I think about camera angles. That's where I think about lighting, or that's where I think about the actual text of, am I using comedy? Am I using horror? Am I using sarcasm? What am I using in order to accomplish this? Because I know I cannot control the quality of my voice. So I just have to keep reminding myself to put that aside and to focus on everything else. And the things that I can control will give me more faith and more confidence in the things that I'm less confident about. And of course, the final word of advice, which goes for literally everything, and I keep reminding myself about this, and I'm a very bad person at doing this, but I need to remind myself that if you don't have faith or trust in yourself, but the people around you do, you should trust and love and respect them enough that they have a right opinion about you. Because you love them, right? You respect them. So they must be right. Because like they're a smart person. They're really good at what they do. Otherwise, you wouldn't be spending time with them. And if they're saying this good thing about you, well, they must be right? Because they're so cool. And so with that logic, the people around you can also boost you up, can also bolster you. Look around at you and you can also see the people that you've helped as well, when it's the same exact thing, right? You don't like your voice for this and you like someone else's voice for that.
Okay. Can I ask a follow-up question?
Mhm, mhm.
Do you like, I don't know, I have a hard time remembering my speeches. Like, do you remember your performances? Because like I'll just kind of get up there, I'll deliver, and people afterward they say I did great, but like I don't remember actually being up there. You know, it's not, I mean, it's not like I black out or anything. I just
Sure.
don't, you know what I mean?
What kind of speaking are you doing, if I could ask?
I speak about writing, about healing from childhood trauma. I speak about motherhood. I've got 2 little kids. Yeah.
So mostly kind of keynote speeches, kind of a more long form speech, so to speak.
Yes. Interviews, that sort of thing too. Yeah.
Mhm, mhm. And see, and this is where when we go to my if we reference the lesson, the environment of where we are reading this, and because this is not slam poetry, right? This is a long form thing. This would be more closer to if I were going to be doing a full set of poetry. If I were going to perform poetry for 30 minutes, I can't be screaming for 30 minutes. And the audience would be bored if I was screaming for 30 minutes. So where do I memorize banter? Where do I pull out some improv? Where do I interact with the audiences? So for me, I have had a bag of tricks of like, sometimes I know how to transition from this poem to that poem. And if the audience is calling for it, I'll start pulling on those. I have my poems completely memorized, and the transitions I usually kind of improvise, but I've transitioned between them so much that I know what the connected thoughts are. And that's what it is for me that makes it more, that makes me more participatory in it, is that I'm remembering every time what these connections are. And I'm actively going, okay, so how am I going to transition from this moment to that moment? I got to make sure I don't lose the audience. And I'm much more actively participating with the elements going on. And I think with the keynote, if you're just sustaining something, I think those are the points in which you can really relish and you can take a breath. You can make little notes in your script and like have like a little asterisk for like a breath, and then even a change of tactic of like, I've been doing like informational, succinct, take a breath, y'all, because like everything's crazy, right? And then that's the moment where you can break cadence, you can break a little bit, both with technique of speaker, of doing a different tactic. So learning, well, if you're interviewing people, would they maybe appreciate a more sillier question? Or perhaps maybe this is a question of challenging yourself. How would the speaking process be more fun for you? Or how can you put yourself more into it so you can kind of remember, oh, right, what is the objective of this? That's also something I really enjoy about the objective aspect, is that I'm a performer. So I love the audience. I love the spotlight. Like, I love performing in front of audiences. So one of my main objectives is to make sure that everybody is walking away understanding what I was putting down. And because of that, all of my techniques and all of my tactics go towards this singular goal of to be understood. And so that's why I'm very gestury with my hands. That's why I know how to transition from place to place. That's why I know how to do improv. And that's why I know how to do these small things, because they're all kind of working towards this goal of being understood. And so if your goal is to inform, to spread love, if your goal is to empower others, to shine light on other people's voices, that's what you got to keep working towards, right?
Okay, so I'm hearing you say, get beyond yourself in a way.
If you can.
Is that
Don't
fair?
lose yourself, but if you're able to, if you see around you, then you can also see where you are, right? If you
Sure.
realize that you're by the
I like
7-Eleven and you're not at the Arby's, then clearly you're in a different place, right?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Alex, can we back up to accessibility?
Yes.
A lot of poetry that you read on the page, frankly, there's a lot of poems I read that I go, I have no idea what they're talking about.
Mhm.
Do we need to, when you're writing for performance, you need to make sure people will know because they can't look back and read it again and, go,
Yep.
okay, that's okay. This means this is implied and yeah. But so how do you
Well,
make it accessible?
I am going to grab a random poetry book and I am going to okay. So here's a poem by Ilya Kaminsky. I'm going to read it and then I'm going to perform it. And then I'm going to show you, and then I want you all to think what the poem looks like. And then I'm going to show you what the poem is.
He's pretty
So
heavy.
this is called While the Child Sleeps, Sonia Undresses. She scrubs me until I spit soapy water. Pig, she smiles. A man should smell better than his country. Such is the silence of a woman who speaks against silence, knowing silence moves us to speak. She throws my shoes and glasses in the air. I am of deaf people and I have no country but a bathtub and an infant and a marriage bed. Soaping together is sacred to us. Watching each other's shoulders. You can fuck anyone, but with whom can you sit in water? She scrubs me until I spit soapy water. Pig, she smiles. A man should smell better than his country. Such is the silence of a woman who speaks against silence, knowing silence moves us to speak. She throws my shoes and glasses in the air. I am of deaf people and I have no country but a bathtub and an infant and a marriage bed. Soaping together is sacred to us. Washing each other's shoulders. You can fuck anyone, but with whom can you sit in water? So, two different kinds of readings, so to speak. And
Yes.
now a moment of what you think the poem looks like, how it would be laid out on the page. And
Oh, there it is. Huh.
right? So the first reading I was doing, I was really relishing on the line breaks. I was really relishing on the pauses. But then in the second reading, when I was kind of performing it, there were clear lines of dialogue. There were clear places where if you didn't do the line break, it would feed into the next line and you could read it completely as a sentence. So again, this is the difference between, this is the objective. What is your objective with the poetry? And a lot of people really do like the slow, deliberate choices because they're able to hear things. And sometimes it does sound better. And maybe a combination of both sounds best. I just grabbed another random one. This is Obit by Victoria Chang, also very, very wonderful.
Oh, yeah.
This one is actually a masterclass in a lot of different things that we were talking about because this book is exploring the grief that she had after her parents passed away. But she did not want to do boring old elegy poems. She just thought it was dumb, that it was not serve her, that she didn't want to just do elegies, that it just wasn't going to go right for her. But then she read an obituary and then she decided, oh, this is how I'm going to do these poems. And she started writing. Every poem in this book is formed like an obituary. They're all just blocks of text and they're all framed like an obituary, but it's the speaker now telling the story of their parents passing away and all the things that have passed away along this entire journey. Ambition died on August 3rd, 2015, a sudden death. I buried ambition in the forest next to distressed. They used to take walks together until ambition pushed distress off the embankment. Now they put a bracelet around my father's ankle. The alarm rings when he gets too close to the door. His ambitious nature makes him walk to the door a lot. When the alarm rings, he gets distressed. He remembers that he wants to find my house. He thinks he can find my house. His fingerprints have long vanished from my house. Some criminals put their fingers on electric coils of a stove to erase their fingerprints, but it only makes them easier to find. They found my father in the middle of the road last month, still like a bulbless lamp, unable to recall its function, confused like the moon. At the zoo, a great bald eagle sits in a small cage because of a missing wing. Its remaining wing is grief. Above the eagle, a bird flying is the eagle's memory, and its prey, the future. And so a completely different poem, a completely different reading, completely, as you can see, even the form of it will even change the way you read it. Versus when she goes into the middle of her book where she does one long poem and it's just like a 20-page epic where it's all spaced out and it's so cool and it's so wild. And if I were to read this, it would be a lot more different. I would say something like circular saws, grinding gristle, tightening time. I wonder whether time is running away from death or toward death. I wonder whether death sounds this way or whether death has no sound. The food truck blows its horn. The sun pushes and pushes. 9 mothers with strollers. Babies sit upright like kites. But see, the interesting thing about this poem is that the way that these lines are spaced out with the spacing, I could completely read instead of the sun pushes and pushes 9 mothers with strollers. I could just start reading 9 mothers with strollers, babies sit upright like kites. The statue of a woman has a space where the heart should be. Through the space on the other side of the park is an American flag. Or I can say through the space on the other side of the park is an American flag. The way that it's spaced out will change the reading of it. So these are all these very small elements of when you're reading your poetry. Is this a poem that's better to be read on the page? Or is this a poem that you want to have read out loud and have people enjoy and experience and feel it in their bodies and in their ears, as opposed to their eyes and then into their spirits and souls?
Do you do anything to warm up before you perform a poetry?
A lot of breathing, a lot of red leather, yellow leather. 99 nuns in an Indiana nunnery, lots of tongue twisters, but I do. I have 3 older brothers and we all played basketball. So I also kind of have an athlete mentality sometimes about exercise and drills. Like John Steinbeck wrote for like 5 hours every day. And it was just about that level of muscle memory of like, it's stretching. In basketball terms, it's free throws. It's, making sure you do your drills, but then it's also that level of practice doesn't make perfect, it makes permanent. So you kind of have to remember what you are doing. So when I'm warming up with an intention of like, all right, I'm going out there and I'm going in competition mode. So I'm going to put my blinders on. I'm going to get in my own headspace versus, oh man, I'm going to be doing a workshop for high schoolers. All right, I got to Google what's on, I got to see what's trending on Twitter right now. I have to figure out what talking points I need to so these high schoolers think that I'm cool and stuff. There are lots of different ways to warm up in recordings, but I usually just do, a couple of vocal warm-ups. I always make sure to massage my jaw. A looser and slacker jaw is a more genuine looking face, because usually tight-jawed, lock-jawed people are suspicious or are tense. So it's those kind of things of even your physical body. I like to stretch. I like to make sure that I drink some water, really comfortable in the space. And then for writing, my actual writing exercise every morning, I will put on 1 minute and just write until the alarm goes off. But I cannot stop writing. Cannot stop writing, even if it's, I don't know what to write. It's for me, it's about the physical process of sitting down and writing words. And then later I've increased it to 2 minutes and then 3 minutes and then 5 minutes. Right now I'm still around 2.5 minutes. I need to regain that muscle again. But even if it's just getting into that physical memory, it's practicing that ritual of writing. And then, the best warm up, also imitation is always the best form of flattery. I have a big old stack of books that I need to read, and there is a lot of things I would like to try myself. And I think exercise, I think experimentation is a very fun form of exercising and warm-ups. My girlfriend, she's an illustrator and a storybook author, and we've been talking a lot about how we are trying to challenge ourselves with different genres because we're so focused in our own wheelhouse that we're trying to go outside of it to try to figure out why these other things are cool and what makes them tick. And she just told me a wonderful anecdote about Jim Henson today, and how Jim Henson, the Muppets, greatest of all time, but the fact that he was creating he revolutionized the way these puppets looked because the format has changed. This wasn't a live audience performance anymore. This was straight to television. This was going to kids and families all across the world. And also specifically, it was kind of geared more towards like New York kids. And it was geared in such a way that it was showing so much personality in the faces. The screens could get up that close. And so Jim Henson was creating a puppet to fit this medium. But of course, by doing this, he created some of the most lovable characters. And by doing this, he realized, oh, with this medium, I have more control over XYZ. So I'm going to use these things and I won't worry about the live audience anymore because now I have control and I have new access to these tools. So I always find that very, very helpful when considering, again, environment, the relationship, the objective, the characters, and how your character would change in different circumstances. Like if your poem literally somehow then took place 10 years later, what would change? These kind of weird small considerations that are very conceptual, but I think inform a lot. Just like how 10 years might pass, changing from a television to a film to live stage are all very different things.
Yeah. So the pandemic must have changed your way of life to a certain extent because people weren't doing live shows.
Yeah, it was a lot of these virtual keynotes, and it was a lot of kind of getting back to my basics of, oh, right, I'm going to be performing for a not vocal audience and I might not see some faces. I have to remember how to not be insecure again. And that was tough, especially when you're just like looking at yourself in the screen. But there was a lot of, for me, when I was memorizing my poems, when I was doing slam poetry, when I was in competition, a lot of people asked if I choreographed my poetry. And I am just a very gesticulative kind of person. And also, I think that just comes from performance in general and me kind of understanding how my body moves. But because of that, and people kept complimenting on that, I kind of kept going in on that. It seemed like this was a tool that I could use to my advantage to keep my style and keep my voice and to seem more distinct than others. But I have seen many poets who just walk on stage, they control the room. They like Rachel McKibbins is a great example. She is the scariest poet I have ever met, and she is so cool. She once did an entire poetry set holding her baby.
Nice.
Like it was incredible, like a full like 15-20 minutes, and the baby will like at one point went like meh, and she was like shh, and then just continued. And because we didn't want to wake up the baby, we were all like, you could hear a pin drop. But that's the kind of power and control that Rachel McKibbins has. And it's also very reflective in her poetry. You take a poet like Janae Johnson, who is very physical and literally has a poem talking about how she is dancing so hard she ripped her pants open. That kind of physical poet. But of course, Janae Johnson has poems where she stands completely still because it's about not ripping her pants. Maybe it's about something else in her life, right? So there's all these kind of different ways that we have learned to adapt. And for me, since it is kind of virtual, it's me learning how to go slower, because there isn't pause for like audience reaction, and there isn't pause for like audience laughter or taking that moment to breathe.
Yeah, it's a big difference for sure. I know for me, I'm a block of wood on stage. I'm not good at moving around, but
Well, I can
not getting the
always,
reaction, it's
yeah, I
hard.
mean, I can always help, like, at this point, I can, since we've got some extra time, yeah, questions and comments. Of course, I've got my own poems. We can keep talking about poems or different advice to give to younger, to newer folks and all that good stuff. Or I can also just, maybe assign some writing prompts, and we can do a little bit of writing right now.
Could you read one or two of your poems for us? Perform them for us? We would
Sure.
love that so much.
Would you like to hear like a memorized version, or should I read off the page?
Whatever you want to do.
Okay.
How about one of each?
One of each. Sure, that sounds great. Well, I was already doing my dad poem, so I might as well just continue to do it. So a little bit about my dad is that, a little bit about me first is that I'm half Vietnamese, half Chinese. My mom is Chinese, grew up in Vietnam. My dad is Vietnamese, and he grew up in Vietnam. And they both made it to America around the late 70s, early 80s after the escape from the Vietnam War, after the destruction and collapse of it. They met in Virginia. But my dad had already been in the States for a few more years than my mom had. And I remember, and my dad said, and I was like, oh man, Dad, like, so how was it? How was it? And he was like, it was pretty cool. And he said that the thing that he remembered most was that he saw like the most cars he had ever seen, ever, like in his entire life. And he was like, that's when I knew I'd become a mechanic, because someone would always be needed to repair all of those cars. Like even back then, my dad had the vision of like job security. And like, that's how my dad shows love. Like he doesn't really talk much. Like me and my dad say a total of like 13 words when we drive home, and let the hum of the pavement fill in the rest. My dad likes cars because cars are easier than people. People don't have a dashboard, don't have a check engine light. They will not tell you if something is wrong, but cars are always honest. My dad is always honest. He doesn't talk much, but he lets his motor oil hand speak for him. Growing up, my brothers and I never learned much about cars. 4 sons of a mechanic, not one of us could replace a blown tire. My dad never taught us, said he would be around forever to fix all of our cars. Plus, we'd be college men. We'd be doing more important things with our hands. He never talks about love, but he always shows it. So while he teaches me how to drive, he tells me to listen to the car. Cars always tell you what is wrong, but only if you listen, Alex. So I'm trying to listen to the car, and I hear the engine, I hear whirs, the pistons pumping fire and gasoline as we cruise down Powell Boulevard. And then I imagine the power it must take to get metal son and father down that road. And then I hear my dad's heart. I hear this heavy machinery, all ignition and patience, as I go too fast in a school zone, or I forget to turn my blinkers on, and my dad laughs and tells me to check my mirrors, check my blind spots, check my weaknesses, tells me to listen. My dad has been listening his entire life. Never once turned on the emergency brake, kept sugar out of his gas tank, turned a key, and carried an entire family with him. But his heart is getting weaker. Nothing lasts forever. Some things you can only prevent from breaking down further. So I try to find the owner's manual to my father, try to reassemble the engine of his childhood to see what steered him here. But his make is of another generation, something I can't understand, something I don't find instructions to, something his dashboard refuses to show me. There is so much mileage in my father's bones. Spots in the road, never ventured because we did not go there. He told us dead end, wrong way, turn around. I don't know what he is hiding in his workshops. What corroded secrets he harbors like rusted ghosts in a junkyard. All I know is I want my hands to look like they've been dipped in oil, to look like they've done something important, like a mechanic, like my dad. I want to be like my dad, someone who always reminds you to buckle your seatbelt, who lets you sit on the lap and steer the wheel. Dad, I know you won't ever tell me what is wrong, but it's okay. We'll just drive instead. I promise. I'm listening. I feel like it's only fair to now do a poem about my mom, right?
Yeah.
So my dad's been a mechanic my entire life. My mom, she has been a Head Start teacher, preschool teacher my entire life. And full circle, I am now working at Head Start as a preschool teacher. We are not in different, we are at different schools, but a lot of her coworkers are like, oh, your teacher knocks, son. And I go, oh no, too much pressure, because my mom is. They go, oh, no wonder you're so cool. I'm like, yeah, I know. Once I did a poem about my mom at like a slam competition, and it got the highest score of the night, and it helped me win. So I called my mom. I was so excited. I was like, mom, I performed the poem about you, and it helped me win. It got the highest score. And she said, you're welcome. So that's the type of like person my mom is. She's very sweet. Let me see, what kind of poem do I want to read about her? Maybe I'll just read. So this would be me knowing the poem well, but not necessarily like performing it like it's a slam. Even that kind of performance just earlier, it was more adapted to this kind of virtual setting. I was kind of going a little bit slower. Obviously, I was sitting versus standing. So there's kind of a difference like that. Let's see what. Trying to find the best one. Oh, this one is literally the one that my mom said was her favorite, so I'll read that one. Last week, winter settled into me, made its way through until I turned into a shiver. And my father performs poetry by gifting me fleece pants. He puts his hand on my shoulder like a rucksack. My dad is a heartbeat, is a couplet, is an inhale, exhale reassurance. I'm in love with a poem, the greatest, most epic, unfinished poem that's still being written and lived. I read the poem at night before I sleep, and I wake up to excerpts of the poem in the morning. Small texts glow in my palms, every word a tiny miracle. Oh, you poem who contains so much poetry inside you. My almanac of like my every good luck token. Someone is in love with me too. And often I will not believe it, would rather deny the love. Fortress moat barrier out feelings, close my eyes and hope I don't recognize the music. But even with my mouth closed, I smell a lilac in my chest. I press my hands against my ears and I taste mango. I open my eyes and there you are. And that's the magic of a poem. It's wild dedication. My mother performs poetry and I wake up to the loudest rainstorm, a cup of coffee my mom made before she left to work, and a note that says heat pie less than 30 seconds. And now I have pie and coffee and clouds on their way to Earth for breakfast. And I leave my dad a poem in his voicemail, and he helps me write the poem by taking me out to lunch. And my oldest brother finishes the poem by calling in the middle of it. And we put him on speakerphone and we laugh and smile. And soon this restaurant is another poem in our anthology of worlds and memories. We are a strange land built by rocks of any size, woods from all corners, waters on every realm, brought here to nourish and feed our plots, to grow out of potential, to eat with our full hands and fuller hearts. The fruits of our love, the seeds we planted long ago, will bloom when they bloom. So until then, what we do is we tend, we nurture, we take care of each other, then we write again. And look, poems. And look, I love you. And see,
Those are
that's
so
the kind of
cool.
poem that might not be the best to compete with because it's slow, it's, very intimate, but it's not a big fireworks performance, right? But was that my objective with this performance? No, not at all. So this is where we have to keep in mind, of course, where are you reading, who you're reading it to, what your objective is. And of course, it will always just come down to what do you want to do?
Mhm. And sometimes I've had poems have effects when we was reading in person that I didn't expect. Either people laughed or they got teary and was like, oh, I didn't know it would affect people that way. Does this happen to you?
I am very humbled and fortunate to say yes. I did a performance for a kind of non-denominational community church group in Beaverton last week, and one of the families that came there, she was also a Vietnamese mother, and she brought her 3 boys, and they wanted to take pictures with me, and it was so sweet and cute. But also the mom, she just we just hugged each other for like a really long moment, and she just said thank you. And then we started chopping it up of like me making jokes with the kids of like, oh yeah, I know those mom punishments too. Like, I know the things that she says. She said that she did all of this to make you feel guilt. And all of her kids are like nodding along. And, it's something that I thought it was only my story and my experience. And it still is. It's still truly my story and my experience. But isn't that the magic of it, is that we all are still somehow connected, that your story will still make me say, I will be like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I heard your story. And can I tell my story? Or oftentimes we are just looking for other people's stories and someone just wants to tell their story. So I think a lot of the times it is just giving somebody an ear.
Do we have any other questions, comments?
Yeah.
How do we start? What's the very first thing we want to do?
Okay, how do we start? My like 3 easy things is I think persona pieces are great. It gives you a distance. You can still put yourself personally in the poem, like intention and objective wise, but you can still have that distance. So let's see. I think I'm trying to think of my favorite persona pieces. A slam poem, performance poem by Jesse Parent. He has a poem called Hooked Cross. And this is a very visual poem because he is speaking from the perspective of a swastika. And he's talking about how the swastika from just the symbol in popular Asian culture, and how then he literally then kind of does this motion where he says he can't, and then he gives a spotlight around him, and then he does Nazi salute. So then he talks about how the swastika has changed over and over and over, but then you realize that the swastika is talking to his brother, and he's talking to the cross. And he's warning the symbol of Christianity that do not end up like me. Do not let another like horrible man take you and repurpose your entire definition. Wow. And Jesse Parent is a pretty religious guy, but also it was a very cool poem that I had never seen before. Tim Henderson from Chicago has this incredible poem where he is a cicada. And it's a love poem, but he's literally going through the entire stages of life as the cicada. So he starts off as a baby, and then his voice cracks, and then he gets older, and then eventually by the end of the poem, he's an old cicada and he dies.
Cool.
And so you got all these great persona pieces where you can kind of put yourself in the poem without putting yourself 100% in the poem. So open letters are always great for that. What would Lady Macbeth actually say to Juliet? Dear Juliet, get your shit together. Get your house in order. But see, right there, you can start identifying yourself with other characters, with other things, and then that's how you can put yourself in there. And then, of course, that's how we build empathy, seeing yourself in other people, all that good stuff. But I have like poems about cartoon shows. I have poems about movies. I have poems about music. I have a lot of poems about, and Hanif Abdurraqib is a really good writer and poet who does this, where he will go really deep into one subject. Usually, like he used to be a music journalist, so he has like an entire like 12-page essay dedicated to his favorite band, Fall Out Boy. But it's also a elegy and a ode to his friend who passed away because they grew up listening to this band together. So it both tells the story of their friend, of him and his friend growing up, and it tells the story of Fall Out Boy, which the band, the two frontmen, are best friends, but they also kind of hate each other. And Hanif and his friend were like best friends, but they also kind of hated each other. So the way these two stories mirror each other in parallel was so, so cool. So you can always find yourself in something, but then the question is, what is the objective afterwards? Now that you've seen yourself in something, what do you want to do with it? I always like writing letters to myself, but like to different versions of myself, 50-year-old version, 6-year-old version, the Alex who grew up on Mars, if you will, alternate versions of yourself.
I have a question as well, as far as kind of what you recommend, or what's like a good way to, I guess, get involved in spoken word, or just be around people who are doing it, and like just to be immersed into that. Like, are you just looking for open mics? Are there places or resources that you usually direct people to? Or
Yeah, definitely. So I think as far as like the mainstream, we've got like Slam Find Inc. and we've got Button Poetry. We've got those folks who are constantly putting out those slam videos, which is a really great way. From there, you kind of go into the smaller communities, but these are all still virtual communities. I've made a lot of really good friends just via social media through these different writing groups. They are definitely out there. There are Twitter writing groups, there are Facebook writing groups. Discord, I really like using as a medium just in general, because it's like Zoom, but it has a couple more functions, and it's free. So you don't, there is never gonna, there won't be like a big cap or anything. But it's mostly for video game streamers and for video game playing, but it's still a pretty good communication service. So as far as that goes, like trying to build that community, for me, I was pretty lucky because I had some solid communities to go to here. I had the Portland Poetry Slam. There was literary arts. I had my high school teachers that were really pushing me to go forward. But then when I moved to Eugene and I started to go to school at University of Oregon, I realized that their Poetry Slam only happened every second Saturday, and that was pretty much it. And University of Oregon didn't even have a slam poetry team. So if you build it, they will come. And also, I love, this is what my favorite high school teacher, Mr. Gonzalez, said to me, because I was like, hey, Gonzo, like, what's the one advice that you would always give, like, for the rest of your life? And he said, be the person you needed when you were younger. And so 18-year-old Alex, who was looking for open mics, and every open mic was at a bar and it was 21 and up, and I just wanted to like be with artists and community and like hang out with other like-minded musicians and writers and stuff. I didn't even have access to those. So if there is nothing around you, to create it. And if there is stuff around you, to just be a part of the community. This has been so much fun for me, and I hope it's been fun for you, but it keeps making me want to keep going back out into the community to be like, all right, this is what we're supposed to be doing. This is how we can start rebuilding community and start rebuilding empathy, and honestly, just, I don't know, be better versions of ourselves. I feel like quarantine and everything has given everybody such a different perspective on everything that for me, returning to writing has been so cathartic, to be able to put everything literally down on paper and to look at it, and then to decide if you don't like it, to just erase it, or to decide if you don't want to deal with it, to just shelve it for a little bit. It's been a really, really wonderful experience to kind of be doing all of these things. So yeah, my recommendation is to just, if there are communities that are near you, go there, bring a friend. So, that's always fun. I remember being so scared when I read at the Portland Poetry Slam for the first time. I was like shaking on stage. I was 18. I had my Justin Bieber hair. I was wearing 2 saggy jeans. It was great. Yeah, and then as far as like literally getting into just performance, I would definitely just kind of leaf through button poetry and kind of see who you like, and then who you like as a performer. There might be performers in general that you like, that you might want to embody their energy. You might want to Prince energy on stage, or you might want to, embody a Sir Ian McKellen kind of energy on stage. But I've always categorized different performance poets into 4 different categories. And this is going to kind of sound a little strange, but bear with me, because there's a TV show called Avatar: The Last Airbender. And so people can control different elements. And so the firebenders, the way that they fight is very, explosive, and they can do all these different things. But earthbenders obviously are very solid. They move things. And even the martial arts styles that they are fighting in are reflective of the earth and the surroundings. So like airbenders are basically Tai Chi masters. They float around. They're very flowy. They go with the action. And waterbenders are kind of the same way as well, with a little bit more, substance. So I kind of imagine, as performers, what element are you? Are you going to perform like a firebender and just? Are you going to be an airbender and kind of, be a little bit more flowy? Are you going to be a waterbender and be gentle? But water also takes shape in many forms. It could be a wave. It can be a snowfall. But so can fire. Fire can be a bonfire. It can be a heater. It could be a little burn on the coil. And then, of course, you got your earthbenders. Solid. But what happens when the earth turns into desert, or when the earth turns into metal? You can still sharpen that hardness. It can still be a cutting thing. It does not have to be bludgeoning. But this is, again, just kind of going back into, how do you see yourself?
Yeah, we do have Slamlandia from Literary Arts.
Yes, Slamlandia. Those folks are great. Julia Gaskill. A lot of the poets that I performed with are still kind of kicking. Actually, one of my favorite, Brian Stephen Ellis, very, very good poet and writer, storytelling coach as well. I love Brian Ellis. I remember one of the first times I was performing at the Portland Poetry Slam, I was performing a very, very bad, not funny poem that was making fun of other people, because I was like, oh, I'm going to be edgy and I want to write a poem that's going to like get me points. So I was trying to write a poem that was literally trying to help me win. And like Brian Ellis booed me off stage. And then later, after the poem, he said, I booed you off stage, Alex, not because that poem was bad, but because you can be better. And he took me to the side to kick my ass a little bit and explain to me like, hey, you're better than this. And I hope you understand these reasons. And because he was someone that I already looked up to and that he was inviting me into the community, I was so grateful to have someone look out for me in this way.
Yeah. Is Portland Poetry Slam, is that happening anymore? Last I saw it was on hold.
I think it's on hiatus right now. I think right now it's Slamlandia. Literary Arts is still doing a couple of their own things. There's going to be a couple more Zoom and virtual events, but there's also virtual events happening all across the globe as well. I've been making good friends with a poet named Masaki out in Lansing, Michigan, and he actually has just become the poet laureate of Lansing, Michigan. So he's really on his groove to just create all of these spaces, open mics, all this good stuff, but he really doesn't want to make it about him. Like, he is the personality, he is the magnetic core, sure, but he's really trying to put the community first. And so he doesn't even read at those poetry readings anymore. He doesn't even host anymore. He's trying to get himself out of this limelight so he can give other people opportunities.
Sounds good. Okay, we've come up on 8:30. Do we have any final comments, questions, or anything? This has been terrific.
Absolutely terrific.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
We really appreciate you doing that.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming through and having a nice evening of talking about poetry with me. Love it. Y'all are my people. This is exactly what I want to do on a Thursday evening, Friday evening, Sunday morning, who knows, anytime.
We're all fans now, for sure. For those who are interested, we are having another Poetry Month open mic next Tuesday, the 19th. So go to OregonPoets.org for the link and come and read, try things out.
Try some things out.
And thank you, Oregon Poets Association, for bringing us this wonderful night with Alex. I love that.
Thanks for coming, Dale.
It meant a lot to me.
Thank you. I'm really glad that I was able to come through and share my poems and share my story. And I'm so glad you were all here to listen to it. And I really cannot wait to hear everybody's poems or your stories, or just, I don't know, even what your favorite song is or what your favorite food is.
I'm making enchiladas for Easter.
Ooh, Easter enchiladas. I like that. And good alliteration.
Yeah. Why be traditional?
No such thing as tradition. Everything's made up.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you. All right.
We
I
will-
will see you all when I see you. Everybody take care, be well, and be the best to each other. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Good night to everyone. Happy
Night.
Easter.
Bye, Sue.